it around. Daisy will send it around in a moment. And so if there's anyone of the stakeholders who wants to join online. Welcome to this year's AGM. We started having our own AGM meetings as of last year, and we had hoped to have it on our birthday, but due to other issues that we were experiencing, we were busy moving to our new home and other things, we decided to have it a bit later on this year. But Soul City turns 28 this year, and it's a big milestone as we are approaching our 30th birthday that's coming up in 2 years' time. And you know, everyone knows the word Soul City. There's even a township that's named after us, which is a sign of the brand and powerhouse that Soul City is. Sister Bettina, so many people still call Lily and me Sister Bettina till this day. You know, the other day on our social media platform, we posted the theme song to Soul Buddies, the TV drama for the young people that came after the Soul City drama series, and it got over 100,000 views and over 300 comments with mostly now adults saying, I grew up on this show. This show was the basis of my childhood. This is how I knew how to become a responsible young person. And I think the fact that 28 years later, we still have so many people reflecting and relating to Soul City tells us that we are not only a resilient organization, but we are an organization that has made tremendous impacts onto millions and millions of people in South Africa. But without further ado, I'd like to acknowledge everyone who's in the room. Thank you for taking time out to join us, as well as to think through us and journey with us through the past financial year. And we are going to start with two annual report presentations. The first one, I'd like to call up on our CEO, Fina Polisa, who needs no introduction, to give us an overview of the past year. So our financial year, maybe let me start there, begins in March 20. We are reflecting on the financial year 2022-2023, which began in March 2022 and ended this year in February. And we were busy. It was also a busy time for our activities, our programs, and our initiatives, as well as our advocacy work. And Fina is just going to give us a reflection on that and some of the key activities that took place this year. I'll start your presentation.
Let me send you just this. Let's use this one. I'm sending you. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. And again, let me reiterate what Bonzo was saying, extending a word of appreciation for all of you who are here. And we still have people coming in. Welcome, Chair. Why must the late colors corner is this side in front. The naughty one. The naughty corner. I think others are still outside. Maybe let's call them in, Stephanie and Rogi, if they are not aware we have started. It's my bag there, you can remove our seat. Okay, let's call the ones that are outside. Thank you. I know there are people joining online. I can't see you, but to everyone who's hearing me and who's joining us today, thank you very much. Soul City can never do the work that it does each and every year without the people within Soul City who work for Soul City, bring themselves every day, show up every day to deliver on, the mandate of the organization, and also the people who are outside the city, but who are us, people who follow us on social media, people who make sure that whatever that we put out there as a product, they consume it and they give us feedback. So the reports that I'm going to show you, is a reflection of that. It's a reflection of that journey that we've taken as an organization between the period March 22 and February 2023. And as I said, this is us reflecting back to our supporters the work that has gone in and how their support has enabled us as an organization to be who we are. Should I? Yes. Okay. So we have a strategy that is called Strategy 25, 2025, and this is where we were spelling out what the journey would be from the time I took over as CEO. So this financial year that we are reflecting on was my third year sitting at the helm of the organization, and what a journey it has been. Sometimes you take a position believing in yourself that I have the technical know-how. And then you get in there, the technical know-how is not the only thing you need. There are other things that help you grow, or things that challenge your own beliefs in yourself. And what I can tell you that at the end of this period that we are reflecting on, I'm a different person. I relate differently to people. I have a better appreciation for leaders, because leadership is not easy, but it's something that is worth celebrating each time you get it right. And we got a lot of things right, a lot of things wrong, and we learned as we go. So our strategic priorities for FY23 were these three key pillars, where as an organization in our strategy, we are very clear. Patriarchy must fall. And whatever that we do, we are doing it towards achieving this goal of dismantling patriarchy and all its subsystems. We know that we can only do that through collaboration and building alliances with like-minded organizations. And seeing some of you in the room is testament to that we are not walking this journey alone. And of course, we center the young people. If you see our logo, there's a young, beautiful, she's red, but she's a black woman. You can see by the afro. There's a young black woman there that, Soul City is working towards supporting in every sphere of her life. So we are there to make sure that the young women's voices are amplified. We build feminist consciousness, and we give their voice, we amplify their voice, we allow them to exercise agency, and we also build movements where their activism can be activated. So those are the three strategic pillars, and everything that we have done, you will see, how these three pillars come through. So every year, we now, since 2023, the year. And this year, I'll say this year, not we are now. We now have an understanding when I'm saying this year. I'm talking about March 2022 to February 2023. Our theme was the year of advancing the feminist agenda. Because we started with saying we are building a feminist organization, and so people needed to see us in that light. And we then got hit by COVID. And we were saying we are building resilience as an organization. Some funders, were saying the money should be moved and used for this, used for that. So shifting programs and shifting the budgets. So we needed to be resilient so that we don't sink as an organization. And thank God we didn't sink. And now we are saying we are advancing the subject, and we are now putting it into action. So we did a lot of work that helps us to cement the agenda, the feminist agenda. So Bonto asked me to take this through the year, very high level, because we will read the detail in the report. So in Q1 of the year, we started the year on a high note. We won an award. We were awarded by the Standard Bank Top Women as we received a certificate as organizations recognized as being Africa's top gender empowered organization. And you can see what it means to be a gender empowered company. We walk the talk. When we say young black women, even if you look at our current structure, you will see young black women in our also a young black woman. I'm not that old. I also received an award, which was titled Justice Champion in Kigali, in recognition of the work that and we had different platforms that we created to ensure that we dismantle patriarchy. And the first webinar that we hosted in 2022 spoke exactly to our priority. Patriarchy, and that webinar was done with Social Gender Justice, the NPA was represented, and other civil society organizations participated in the webinar. We also did a regional collaboration with an organization in Kenya, where we were talking about International Women's Day. So we did a partnership in March where we were how to ensure that we forefront women with this Kenya organization called BB Talks. And in May 2022, we also partnered with UNFPA. And the partnership was an interesting one because this was specifically around traditional areas where they wanted to look at patriarchal norms and structures, dismantling those practices within these rural areas where initiation schools are prominent. And one of the campaigns was to speak against young boys being taken to the mountains without proper education around masculinity. Because we are not saying culture is wrong, but we were saying the practices within which boys, when they come back from the initiation, when they come and rape becomes the norm, disrespect of women becomes the norm, was something we needed the traditional leaders to reflect on and engage deeply in. And I think this was one of the biggest projects, as you will see, with the numbers that we reached with the media campaign on this particular project. And again, we partnered with another organization in Kenya called Dada. They do similar work to us. They focus on young women, and they also run young women clubs. So we did an exchange kind of program with them where we were looking at what are the mental health issues that young people are challenged with in this era that we live in. In quarter two, it's supposed to say quarter two there. In quarter two, which is July to August, we then launched our big project now, the Feminist Leadership and Activism Center, which we had spoken about before it was launched a lot. And I'm happy to, this is one of the Black members who is part of the Soul City team as a secondment from the internship or from the fellowship into the organization where she can come and learn and perfect some of her skills in the space of communication. So we launched this program. 20 young women from all over South Africa were enrolled. And I must say, what excites me is that we brought in young women who were just coming in on the basis of their passion about the communities they live in and wanting to bring change. For them, social change was what was driving them. Seeing the realities of young women, teenage pregnancy, rape, poverty, and them saying, I want to be a change maker in my community. And that was the criteria. We didn't ask for university degrees, we didn't ask for a lot of things. We just said, what drives you as a young woman? And when they told us what drove them, we then connected, and they are now in this program, which is run for 24 months, supported by Ford Foundation. And I'm sure as if you follow us on social media, you'll see their AGM they're doing great work in their communities. Disability is also something big on our agenda because we are an intersectional feminist organization, so we don't just do one issue. We look at many issues. You know, I think one of the interesting things that we did was this march on ending period poverty. You know, and I know our staff member is very passionate about it. She even challenged Parliament, and one day she can tell us her story. You know, she went and challenged the government on their pricing of, we call them what? Period products. So we must learn the language and speak the language. But you can see some of the outcomes there in line with our strategies that we were catalyzing feminist movements for social change, and we were building a more comprehensive or focusing on a comprehensive approach to addressing social justice issues. September to November, Safety Pin was one of the projects that we did. We now closed the project and it's continuing, you know, but it was a pilot that SoCity was involved in, and I think it's also one of the projects that we did well in because we brought to light the issues around safety of women in eThekwini, and of course eThekwini being the pilot and now the project rolling out in the whole of South Africa. It was supported by the Humanity Foundation. 10 to 27, we are now a young woman as an organization who understands herself and who's very assertive. You know, so some of the very interesting projects there, as you can see, are again centered around norm changing and moving from just raising awareness and injustices in South Africa. The last quarter of the year, you know, we participated in many programs of government, but for us, what was interesting was that the focus on SRHR, which is a big issue, we pushed, and you will see some of the statements we issued there when we were still challenging statutory rape, the provision of safe abortions in government facilities, challenging the very same partner that we have, which is the Department of Health, to say when are they going to ensure that facilities are offering the service that young people need so that they don't create a market for the illegal service providers. Because one of the activities that the department had asked us to do was to participate in removing the illegal abortion advertisements on street posts. But beyond that, the conversation that is still needed and that we still need to have with the department is, why is there a market for that? Where are they failing? Where are we failing as their partners to make sure that the facilities that they provide resources to actually do that work, because this is a service that is needed by young people. So these are the flag young women, you know, very beautiful black young women. Our media reach, I'm sure you can see that we reached in excess of, you know, hundreds and thousands of people with some of the infographics that we put on social media just to spark a conversation. And maybe one day our team will just do a class with other organizations on how to start conversations. And they can also teach us how they start conversations. You can see the radio work, working with national or the SABC, I think is a game changer because we are able to reach millions of people, but not just with words of information. We repeat these information sessions that we do on the radio. Sometimes it's weekly sessions, sometimes it's monthly sessions. You get to hear from people in the provinces you are targeting what their thinking is around the issues, and you are able then to continue with the media work that we do to challenge some of those stereotypes or even some of those problematic beliefs that still exist in those communities want to do research on this to see if we have shifted the norms. So the MNE team, research team, is looking at going back into those communities to see what has happened. Budget is always a constraint, but we want to have legitimacy when we speak about these issues, not just to say we reached these numbers, but we want to say this is the change that the reach has brought. And there's a slide where, sorry, this one isn't complete, but we were showing some of the media work that we have done. So the updated presentation I was sending you was showing the other media work, but we can skip that one. So I think these are the last two slides that I'm going to show. We, employee training and development is also very key. Like I said when I began, the work that we do that looks beautiful out there for people to consume is because of the people internally. And if we don't invest in them, if we don't spend some of our resources on developing their skills, on making sure that they upgrade them, then we will be doing any justice. So not only are we concerned with young women and people who are outside the organization, but also within the organization, we make sure that we invest significant time and amount on our staff. We also make sure that their well-being is of concern to the organization, so we make sure that whenever they need mental health support, whenever they are going through stuff, we are there to support, and we have an organization that we have contracted that offers the EAP services for our staff. And this is the team at Soul City. You can see the mood, we have fun. I'm sure you can see the CEO somewhere on the floor there. This is the fun we have. We treat each other as colleagues. And yeah, I think this is the last slide. So thank you very much. Eugene will tell us how much we spent.
Yes, definitely. And we're leaving the best for last, which is always the money, for after our kind of short panel discussion due to a lot of our guests needing to leave early. So, we've been talking, a lot of the issues that we've raised today, or that Fina raised in her presentation, were around the fact that funding has become a problem. Many of you have a history of Soul City or have worked at Soul City for a long time, and you've seen the organization go from hundreds and over 100 staff to a smaller staff, or where grants have changed over the years. There's been a conversation around funding. When Soul City shifted its vision from a health communications and development institute to more of a feminist strategy, it also determined what kind of funding they are. People are afraid of the word feminist, not just in society when you call yourself and portray yourself feminist, but even in the NGO space or in the civil society space where activism is at the core of the work that we do. But Soul City was bold enough before many organizations in South Africa to take that step and say, we are a feminist organization. And the question we are asking ourselves today is around feminist funding. What does feminist funding look like? How do we ensure we have feminist funding? And is feminist just a word that we're afraid of? Because look at the history, the 28-year-old history of Soul City. What was being done? The Domestic Abuse Act that was Soul City and Power worked on in the early 90s was part of feminist work, where the first ever hotline to report domestic abuse, as it was called then, now we call it gender-based violence, was there. The child grant that we see today, it was an advocacy campaign by Soul City. Matakala story, which even till this day, when donors make examples about how to use social behavioral change and entertainment as a way to show what happened, how to change behaviors, it is the one that is being used. Like I said, Sabetina, a matriarch in a community who led people through different social behavioral change and the different messaging. That was feminist work. It wasn't labeled feminist work, but it was feminist work. So we want to have a conversation, an honest conversation, a conversation that we believe is not being had, not only to reflect on our own struggles as an organization, but what is happening in other organizations. So I'd like to introduce our panel, Dr. Talim, who's the chair of our board, Bungi Wendon, who's the CEO of Lisa, and we are just going to quickly log in our virtual guest, who is Malina Ziko, who is from the Freedom Feminist Fund, an organization that has really only focused on funding young feminist movement. What inspired their vision to do that kind of work, and how do we do it? So there will be, as Tina does her intros, we'll just be connecting by the virtual. There's a lot of technical aspects to this work, so pardon me as I do that.
And let's welcome the ladies to the round of applause. Thank you. I think you did a great job introducing the discussion and the work that CBOs do, and I'm talking CBOs at the level of organizations that are doing great work in communities like KZN, who receive 100,000, sometimes 200,000 as the maximum funds, and having to stretch themselves as organizations to reach communities that are dealing with big issues, rape, that are dealing with gender-based violence and femicide, because we must not forget that it doesn't end just in abuse for some women. They end up being killed, and so we struggle with the issue of PPV and F, which is femicide. And funders sometimes don't realize that the reality on the ground and what they sit in boardrooms discussing about what the money can be used for is a mismatch. When you go and say, look, yes, we know we need to reach 20 people with this kind of intervention, but what we see on the ground needs a different kind of intervention. We struggle to get those realignments, those adjustments. Sometimes we even have to return money to funders because it becomes difficult to use the funds, as I indicate. So I want the panel, as we discussed, to look at such issues. And I was trying to paint a picture of the reality that I know as a funder myself to some of these small CBOs. We struggle with because we don't have our own money. We are getting money from big funders who are saying, we want you to channel money to these other organizations in this way. And when we come back and say, but the need is different on the ground. That shift is hard to, and our argument is that it's because these funds are not feminist also in their design. They are just looking at how many people are reached. It becomes a number thing. So you are giving 250,000, but your target is 1 million people. So if you divide 200,000 by 1 million, it means you spend a cent, not even a cent, 0.0. They'll tell you 0.0 whatever on each individual. Admin costs are not included. We had to say to our neighbor, but we had to reject a funder who was not giving us admin costs. They were saying we are giving you 6 million, and we then said to them, this is our admin cost, and this is our salary recovery. They said, no. No admin cost, no salary recovery. So what are you giving money as? Why are you giving us money to do what? So let me introduce my two panelists. On my left, the chair of Soul City Board, the UN Rapporteur for Health. So she's a big person. She will tell us more about herself. And then on my right, is Bongi Wendondo, who's also another person because the organization is doing marvelous work. You know, and I think they got the principle of feminist funding right. You know, so she will tell us how they got it right. You know, how that journey isn't like she's still connected. She's from Frida, another feminist fund targeting young women. So Bongi, let me start with you by asking, because your organization Tanganyika, you know, is an intermediary and it's empowering young women and it's feminist, right? I'm making a long assumption by saying it's feminist. And the funds that you give, you don't just give funds for the sake of funding, but the funds are targeted at the feminist work. So how did you get it right? What are the lessons that we can learn from your journey?
So, good morning, colleagues. It's wonderful to see old friends, old colleagues, you know, people that contributed to my journey as an advocate and a development practitioner. So it's wonderful to be back here. So I need to correct a few things with that. First of all, we haven't got it right. Yeah, I think we are learning. We continue to learn. I think it's a journey, and I don't think it's a journey that's necessarily has an end point. The other correction I need to make is that we don't identify ourselves as a feminist fund. Our funding is based on feminist principles. And we've made the distinction because we haven't been as bold as you guys have been in being out there declaring ourselves as feminists. There are principles of feminism we have embraced, but we have been a lot more conservative in taking on a feminist identity. And I say conservative because in many ways I'm admiring the boldness with which Soul City has gone about it. And I suspect, not sure, but suspect that a lot of us in many aspects identify with feminism, you know, whatever that means to you, because it tends to mean different things to different people. And yet, we also recognize that when you walk into a room and you are quick to wear that identity, you are also quick to, you also attract a certain level of consciousness because our society has associated feminism with radicalism, yeah? And radicalism is not necessarily a good thing because everything that we do in life is a negotiation. It's about the tension and about giving and taking and giving and taking as we go along the line in a progressive way, yeah? So those two things I just wanted to correct. But in starting, I want us to just maybe move away from finding employment and just talk about what are the interventions we want to support. So if Soul City woke up and you were no family at all, does that mean that you would not have a view on what interventions you want to support? I want us to start thinking about what work do we want to support and why. Because for me, funding is an enabler. And in the process, we've given a lot of credence to funding and resources, and it almost gives the impression that if our development partners were to wake up, you know, the people who give us funding. If they woke up tomorrow and they were not there and they didn't give us funding, it almost gives the impression that there would be no community development work happening. And I don't think that is correct necessarily. There's a lot of work that is going underfunded, unfunded, a lot of volunteerism. There's a lot of brilliant community development work that is happening outside of funding. And we must not allow ourselves to be drawn into suggesting that it starts and ends with funding. It doesn't. It starts with the agenda that we set of what we want to support. And funding becomes an enabler for us to be able to do that work. So for me, in thinking about the what, it's the interventions we want to support, and we need to have clarity. And you have identified yourselves as a feminist organization. So it actually makes it easy for you because you are saying the what is we want to fund feminist work. We want to fund work that advances gender equality. We want to fund organizations that embrace and reflect, that center women's work and women's, pursuit for justice. So I think that's an important part. Your ideology and therefore what you believe in. In terms of funding, I think if you understand funding to be an enabler of what you want to achieve, then the next question is, how do you fund that? Right? And I think maybe that's where your question comes in. How do you fund? First of all, you want to fund activities that are already happening. You don't want to come with your own activities. So you want to fund activities that are already happening. You want to fund organizations that already existed that bring the work so that you can support them in what they're doing. But the complexity is what we are alluded to. There's always the upstream and the downstream. So the upstream is always the limitation. So it doesn't matter how you define how you want to fund. You are taking on grants that have got that themselves come with conditions. So your upstream funders will always, in many ways, dictate what you can do. In fact, we get to a point where we literally pass on the same contracts to our partners because in trying to manage this, you recognize that if your funder is expecting X, Y, and Z, and you are going to get it from your implementing partners, then you must also expect that your implementing partners should be able to give you X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, you will not meet your upstream, reporting obligation. So in many ways, the work is very much limited, but our approach has been, we want to fund organizations that deal with gender power relations. So we want to fund work that looks at dismantling of the traditional power dynamics. We want to fund work that recognizes the context in which women, and in particular Black women, and in particular those that live on the margins, so disabled, women with disability, women, rural women, so women who live on the margins. So for us, our approach, the biggest principle is, what is your work trying to do? Is it trying to address the elephant in the room? And the elephant in the room is always power. And we must always be aware that money is power. When you sit in a room and you've got money, you must be aware of the power that you bring into the room. Because money is power. We often say the biggest gorilla is lies. And that is true. There's no running away from that. We will never get to a point where, as organizations, as civil society organizations, we demand how we want to be funded. I think we're making a mistake. In fact, in making those demands, in fact, let me share with you a story. Often when we talk about philanthropy, we talk about it as if it's funding that's coming from the US, from the Ford Foundation. We are all involved in some kind of social justice work within our family networks, within our extended family networks. I remember at some point in my career, I went home. I come from the Eastern Cape, and there was a neighbor who is a distant relative whose son was not going to school. And so I asked what was the problem. They said it was a funding issue. I said that rural schools don't pay this, but they said no, but high schools actually it's just the funding schools like that. I said, okay, how much is required? It wasn't. And so I paid. I mean, it was the kind of money where you are actually able to pay for the year. It wasn't a lot of money. But we went on this journey over several years. And I remember one time this young man called. He must have been about grade 11. And he called and and I was in a meeting. So by the time I looked at my phone, I had like 7 missed calls from him, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what has happened? So I called him back and he said to me, there's money that is required at school. I said, what is it for? He explained that I don't quite remember what it was for, but I said, and then I said, when is it required? It was outside of school fees and he said it's required on Friday, and this was like Wednesday afternoon. I said, but why do I only get to know about it now? I mean, surely you would have known earlier. So I kind of pushed back about the approach. And he said to me, you know what, forget it. And I thought to myself, how did we get to a point where when I'm offering a service, there's a demand on the other side about what that service should look like? About how, when I say jump, you've got to jump. And I can assure you what we are trying to do as organizations working in this space is very complex. We are trying to say to funders who have said, we want to put money into social justice work. It doesn't matter where they want to put their money. And we are saying, give us the money on our terms. The question for me is, are we prepared to walk away? Because we will not be able to influence the agenda to the level where it is our agenda. Because we also have an agenda. When we fund, you guys don't fund charity work. It's a decision you've taken. You are a political organization. Feminism is political. You have said we are going to fund work that seeks to drive change. We want to see social change, therefore we fund. So the people who are doing charitable work can't come to you and say, and make demands on the money, and make demands on how you deploy those resources. Because you have an agenda. It's that ideology I started with. You have an agenda, you have an ideology. It's the same thing with the people who give us money. They have an agenda, they have an ideology. So to the extent that we can change and influence on how their practices, I think we must be more humble. We must be more humble about the extent to which we think we can change and shape their practices.
Let me cut you there, just hold that thought and you bring it back. I want to bring talent in, especially on the no.
Okay. So I do think that there is some space and opportunities to constantly be thinking about funding, where it comes from, what it looks like, and of course what is its intention. And I can share my own frustration of experiences of various types of funding. I've been in programs before where the dispersed agency in the country is dispersing money on behalf of a particular government. And that money that they then disperse for a particular HIV program means that there are contractual obligations where the recipients of that money cannot give information on abortion, cannot refer people for an abortion, cannot perform an abortion, and cannot participate in any advocacy related to abortion. And as someone who's a medical doctor, who's an abortion provider, but also cares for HIV positive patients and those who want to remain HIV negative, that for me reflects a misaligned and misunderstanding of what health looks like, and the fact that people are not different compartments. The same person who may need me for HIV care is exactly the same person who may, in the following day, need me for an abortion care. And that fracturing of primary healthcare systems that so many of these countries, regions in the developing world need and rely on the global North funding, it means we actually can't afford to have these fractured and siloed approaches that are being demanded of us in order to get the funding. For me, I think the humbleness needs to come from the people giving funding. Why do you want to go save other people? Right? Is your neighborhood and your community and your country so good and just, and with all of this surplus, you then feel that you want to come and save the rest of us? And that's the kind of pushback that I have noticed. That's the kind of attitude I assume when I speak to many of the global funders. And of course, a lot of their strategies now, I'm sure we've all heard the feminist grant making as a thing. And what does feminist grant making mean? Because for me, feminism is about the ultimate freedom to self-determine and have an autonomous life and have societies that support that autonomous free life. And if your funds are doing the opposite, then there can't be a feminist fund. Because you have already predetermined for me and our community what our urgent and immediate needs should be. And those needs must meet your programs, and you set the targets and indicators, and we spend all our lives, we've done this before, doing MME that speaks nothing to even of our core as institutions, to our core values. So we end up being implementers of programs on behalf of funders, and not really being given the space to imagine, to craft, and to determine for ourselves what are the needs that we need. And I think there is something I think in the space that I always refer to, that we are already doing this work anyway. Whether the funders come or they don't come, the communities we serve are already solving their lives right now. We are in this room. There are women in Bangkok right now who are solving their immediate needs of water, of food security, of electricity, of safe spaces, and rape and gender-based violence, whether we are there or not. So if we are going to come, we need to be able to listen to what communities need. We need to be able to listen and respond to what support looks like for them. And a lot of the time, funding comes already with a program that's been designed. It comes already with indicators for success that's been predetermined. And when you get to the ground, you realize that there's a mismatch between what's urgently needed versus what is success look like. And so for me, in the mandate I do at the UN on the right to health, I always speak about the idea of restoration of dignity. And they always say to me, oh, that's not like a technical human rights thing. I'm like, yes, it's not. Because people are not technical, right? People are full spiritual, physical, mental human beings, right? And so when we know we live in systems that take away our dignity every day, whether it's based on racial discrimination, gender discrimination, sexual orientation, migration status, we know the different ways that systems discriminate. We can't do that work then outside of understanding or being intentional about, is this work going to be supportive or harmful? And for me, centering people's dignity means we need to listen to them. Because I can't define for you what dignified life look like. As a woman who, for example, I make an example for me, who's going through early menopause in her 40s, right? Who's had multiple, exactly, who may at any moment now burst into a hot flash. What does dignity look like for me? From someone who's exactly my age, but who's going through other particular issues and has very different societal context as well. So for me, it is about turning it, flipping it back, and taking back power for communities and for all of us. And I consider us part of the community because we don't have that social or financial capital to make some of the demands, and hence we need to be working together with like-minded people to be able to influence the funders, the grant makers, in how to think differently. If you do the Soul City, they think, oh, it's a Soul City thing, and they think they're special. But they say if there's more of us who are forming and driving in one vision and demanding accountability from funders, I think that's a good thing, because a lot of them still expect that we will work for free anyway, because we've been working for free. So all they are doing is just giving you extra money just to push the program and make it impactful. But what said what you were doing for free wasn't impactful? When the very money they give you actually diverts you from your agenda, right? But we will take the money, obviously, because we do have precedents like admin costs and stuff, and petrol and all of that. And we saw during women-centered, community-run organizations were not listed on the essential services list. And yet those are the organizations, even with a well-run government with all of the money, still don't get the support they need. They were still filling in the gaps, even pre-COVID emergency. So when there's an emergency and there's a heightened risk and heightened need for services, and they don't get listed as essential, it means they're risking their own life, risking imprisonment at the time by responding to women who need support, getting an abortion, getting a pregnancy test, rescuing them from an intimate partner or abusive family situation, storing their goods, helping their children continue with schooling. So these are real examples of when we don't hold them accountable as well, we risk again marginalizing and further pushing into poverty the very people that are always there to fill in the gap anyway. So I think for me the conversation it needs to be both ways. There are things that we need to hold them accountable for, that they shift their thinking, and that philanthropy or grant making should not be something that you do to save other people. It's more than that.
Thank you. Bali, I'm going to bring you in here because you work for an organization that is also boldly identifying as feminist, and you actually do feminist funding, right? And Frida, and you can tell us a bit about it. You know, are you, as a feminist fund, going into communities to say what are the needs, or do you go there with an already prescribed agenda? Because when we spoke about there's an agenda, there's the power agenda as well, shifting that power, and funders hold some power because they have the purse, and we need that purse to do something with the money. Tell us a bit about Frida and how you are avoiding falling into the trap of dictating, for lack of a better word, what the money must be used for.
Thank you so much for that question, and thanks to my co-panelists for those insights. Unfortunately, it's not anything I haven't heard before. I think it's the general rule rather than the exception, that there's almost a dictatorial relationship between donors and grantees, or the organizations, the movements that they fund. And I think it's, I hesitate to put the onus on social justice movements exclusively to do that advocacy, to hold donors accountable, because I think as donors, we actually should be in constant self-reflection about whether or not our strategies are working. I think what we really want is for movements that we fund and support to succeed. And in order for that to happen, we have to trust that grantee partners and organizations that we work with are experts on their own experiences. And if we're dictating their agenda or influencing how they carry out their activities in any way, what we're doing is undermining that sense of trust, which is a short-term strategy for disastrous results, I think. So I think at Frida, Frida is the Young Feminist Fund, and we provide funds, small flexible funds, to about 300 plus young feminist organizations all over the global majority. And so, of course, that includes the African continent in its entirety. Our funding model is actually feminist because it's participatory. And by that I mean we are intentional about identifying the power dynamics and undermining all of those traditional hierarchical structures that get in the way of progress. So a practical example is we, at an organizational level, we do not choose who to fund. We're a staff of about 50 plus right now, but we get applications, thousands upon thousands from all over the world. And so we shift power and shift and share accountability by employing what we call a participatory grant-making process. And by that I mean we actually allow movements themselves to vote and decide who becomes Frida grantee partners through that system. So that's kind of one of the core tenets and the foundations of how we work as an organization, in that movements themselves decide which organizations should be funded, which organizations should be grantee partners for Frida, given the time, given the context of where we are in the world, etc. So it'll be, activists from Uganda who look at different applications and decide, in Uganda, this is a particular issue for the next 5 years, and we really want to support young once you do become a grantee partner, what we try to do is not only dictate, we do not say what we need to focus on. I think that's completely up to the granting partner, but most importantly, we trust that you know best how to get to the goal. And so if, for example, the F in Frida stands for flexibility, and so that's one of the principles that we and values that we hold ourselves to. So what that looks like if you are a freedom granting partner is if you are working on climate justice, for example, and that's what you applied to, that's the work you applied to do when you applied for the freedom grant. But in year 3, you recognize that in your community, sexual and reproductive health rights have become such a burning issue that it actually affects all your climate justice advocacy. And if you don't apply your work through an intersectional and inclusive lens, then you're not going to succeed in your main goal. So what FRIDA allows is for you to shift your funding to support sexual and reproductive health rights activities that will help you achieve your goal of thinking about climate justice. So flexibility is a huge, huge, huge part of what we allow. And I think lastly, I like that there was a conversation around power. I think that's so important. When I think about, because Frida is a donor, but we are also a granting partner, so other donors as well. And so we kind of, we have that unique experience because we were on both sides. And one thing we do advocate for at a donor level, but also at a granting partner level, is to shift the power, but also shift the power in terms of listening to what communities' experiences are as grantees and as organizations receiving this money in report writing mechanisms. So many organizations have said, look, thank you for giving us this money, and we also really appreciate that it's flexible. Not many donors do that. But when we are asked every quarter to write 20-page reports, it takes us out of the field. We don't have the capacity to do it. The work becomes a nightmare because of it. And so our responsibility was to listen to that feedback and organize how we can figure out how to get data in a non-onerous way, so that we have the information that we need, but we're not also overburdening activists with all of these MNE and indicators and whatnot. So it's work that we can do. Frida is doing it. It's possible to shift the power, but it does take advocacy. And I'm glad that was brought up already. More and more pressure needs to be applied, but I'm happy to share that I think there's slowly but surely a changing atmosphere in the donor community, because a lot more are taking a more participatory and intersectional approach.
Thank you. And I know I interjected as you were flowing the points you wanted to raise. From what has been said from the other two panelists, and knowing the way that you mentioned that you follow feminist principles, is South Africa on track to get to a point where the work and the funding, the work that is required and the funding get some form of alignment? Because from where I am sitting, from where society is sitting, our observation is that there's still a lot of misalignment between what reality is and what the funding that is out there is enabling us to do to meet the need on the ground. Are we getting something?
So I think you'd have to look at where the sources of your funding are coming from. Remember, I said everybody who's got money has got an agenda. And we also have agendas, as civil society organizations, funding community-based organizations. And we must not run away from that agenda. So if you look at money that comes from, let me give an example of bilaterals, because they're always the easier one to do. If you look at money that comes from bilaterals, bilateral money is taxpayers' money. It's influenced by the parliament of where it is coming from. So if the European Union is putting money into South Africa, it's influenced by the European Union Parliament. It's influenced by the public, because by by implication, the parliament is a representation of the people, right? So to the extent that you can, if your mission is aligned to where you're getting your money, that's like your best bet. But often we approach funders who are not necessarily completely aligned to the missions or to our agenda. And that is where I think we need to be cautious about the extent to which we can have leverage to change those agendas. How do you change an agenda of a bilateral who is accountable to its own public citizens, for instance? There's a little bit more leeway when you look at bilaterals, but even when you look at the UN system, I was horrified recently to learn that Melinda Bill Gates Foundation is the third biggest funder of the WHO. Now tell me where that leaves us. If a big a global entity is funded by a family foundation to that extent, how much influence could that family foundation be having on the global agenda setting? Yeah. So I think similarly, when you look at the UN, we talk about the UN as a body that represents all of us. The truth of the matter is that the UN is a very complex body that for the longest time has served Western interests. Yeah? And we see it today as it plays out in Israel and Palestine and some of the UN resolutions that are being passed, which go against the UN's own Geneva Convention, its own. So without belaboring the point, I think there's a need for us to look at alignment of funds, alignment of agenda. And what I have found particularly useful is when we have when we have better harmonization of priorities even within the country. So even within our country, outside of the HIV response, which was driven by the NSP, I think there's progress now around GBV now that we have an NSP. But before the NSP, we couldn't even agree what the priorities should look like. We couldn't agree on whether we should be focusing on young girls, whether we should be focusing on women in general, whether we should even be talking to men. Yeah, we still can't agree, many of us. So it's those kind of issues that make it that fragment us as a sector, but also influences what money we're able to accept and what. But one of the things that has not come up in the conversation, and I agree with everything that has been said, I'm just less pessimistic about the extent to which we can influence it. But one of the things that has not come up explicitly is the issue of geographic spread. I think one of the things that we do as funds is to try and look at and focus on funding as many organizations in different areas as possible, without deepening the impact within the same organization or within the same communities. And often when we talk amongst each other, it's actually, we're quite happy to be funding in all 10 or 9 provinces of South Africa for 18 months at a time. Yeah. And we know that 18 months is not enough time to make any impact in any community. So I think we also need to be thinking about how we can deepen impact within the same communities and be comfortable to make investments in the same communities, long-term investments in the same communities to achieve the impact.
Yeah. And Dr. T, I know you must leave. Great. I see Cypren is there. I was going to say, give us your cutting shots, but since you're staying, let's bring Cypren. Cypren is also a board member at Soul City, but he's a CFO at Allen Craig. So, yes, and he's also a board member of our company here at Soul City. There's a lot of requests, in fact, not requests. There was a march that happened in 2018 going to the Sandton shutdown, where civil society was demanding for private sector to invest its resources, because women who are abused work for these companies. There's a lot of money sitting in corporates, and we were not getting traction from them. They are one of the CSI. Their CSI program gives you like 100,000. You know, it's like they are not shifting the needle, and so the civil society movement makes sure that they, knock on those doors, and we now have the GBVF fund, which is mainly funded by corporates. Cyprian, we wish to see your face if possible, so that people know who's behind the mic. If not possible, it's okay, but we welcome you and thank you for joining. Your hand is raised, but let me ask this question. What do you see the role of corporates being in pushing a feminist agenda? Is there a role for private sector in pushing a feminist agenda?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Did you get that question?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, maybe check.
But Dr. T, governance and
I thought you hear the word.
Sorry, now say my.
But let's continue with the conversation. It's flowing so nicely. And I hear your pessimism because I know, there's so much that we can do. Because again, power, money equals to power. And the more, the bilaterals invest, they actually dictate. And I use the word dictate loosely because they then say the things we're talking about, we then don't support contraceptives. So you see it with women falling pregnant, because there's no way they can prevent pregnancy. Because the money that is here is not able to provide those commodities, and also, again, as you were saying here, the spread now, talking about provincial coverage and saturation. We then spread the money so thin within a province. You have 1 million in the Northern Cape, but you want to reach all the sub-districts within Northern Cape. You end up not having any impact. And we do a lot of piloting and hate pilots. Because you're good at them. Yeah. No, not the ones that Soul City does. The pilots that come with projects that are important into the country. Those are the pilots that I say I hate. Because they'll invest a lot of money, billions, and say we are doing this big campaign. For 2 years, we are all running around doing this big campaign. At the end of 2 years or 3 years, we no longer hear about that. You had to make sure that you put infrastructure to meet the objectives of that campaign. When it's no longer being implemented, programs that are homegrown, that we didn't support, now suffer because we went to communities and they got the carrot where young people who join a program are provided with so many things, right? That when that program leaves, we are not able to sustain, and we end up with young people saying, we no longer want to be part of this because you use us for this, you use us for that. We used to get this, now we no longer get it. All those complexities. And for me, I think we are speaking governance issues. How do we get around and how do we push for solidarity in terms of saying, if you're going to bring funds, these are the programs. Do we have a seat at the bilateral discussions? Maybe it's what I'm trying to get to. So that we say, if this money comes in, this is what we have. Homegrown programs. We're struggling now to get Soul City TV back on TV. But everybody's telling us we need them. When you go to funders and say, everybody's saying they need it, they will tell you we have this other program that mimics. I'm talking politics and I'm trying to hide behind. Calling a spade, but you will see programs that mimic what Soul City has been doing. That gets huge funding. So we kill programs that work that are driven by the people's agenda and not the funders' agenda. And when they live with their money, struggle. We start at zero instead of picking up somewhere. Do you see this?
Yeah, so I see all of this as part of activism for me and holding governments accountable. I mean, the very fact that we need to be sourcing money to put in the gaps where they are failing to bring services to people is for me something that we must never stop identifying as a problem, right? Is that because they lack the foresight, not expertise, but the commitment, I think, and with maladministration and corruption so much in the public sector, and I can speak specifically for the health sector, you then have very important programs for young women, for sexual and reproductive health, for contraception, for condoms for lesbian people, right? Being outsourced to NGOs. And I think partly the question is why can't governments everywhere give all their patients what they need throughout their life cycle and their life course? And where there are challenges, we should have trustful partnerships between governments, civil society, and NGOs. And I think outside of that functioning, trustful engagement, we will continue to find some trouble because a lot of the times NGOs are actually doing the work and responding as individual communities, individual women, to the very services they are entitled to by their own governments. And I think that's where the frustration comes from as well. Is that then as a government, if you are then going to negotiate programs and negotiate funding and choose districts and sub-districts without consultation again, it is frustrating because they are so far removed from where we call it, where the tire meets the rubber on the ground, where action actually happens, that there will always be a disconnect. I mean, I had one of the richest men on earth ask me, why have all my money that I have spent on all these programs, names the programs in the different African countries, has not succeeded? And the simple answer is, you come with a designed program from big fancy offices in the US. You have all the intention that because money for you solves everything. You think if I just throw more money at this, things will be okay. Without understanding that advocating for human rights is also important. Ensuring that we have a society and a community, and even through the Flag Academy, we have young people who can hold their own, right? That we are not just recipients of care and are perpetually grateful that someone is giving us some money. Even if none of that money came, we would still find ways to survive. So I think the humbleness needs to come from the top. The people on the ground are busy. They're too busy trying to survive their life. And so how we think about monitoring evaluation, and I often add learning to that, we should do that first. Let's go monitor what's happening. Let's engage communities. Let's learn from what all of that means and analyze it properly. Then only we can go into thinking what is the appropriate solution. It may not be a program. It may be that if you are in Uganda and you are gay or lesbian and you come to me as your doctor, I must report you to the police. You can give me all the money you want for PrEP and for condoms. In that context, what is needed is not more condoms and more PrEP. It's a very different kind of understanding, protection, a human rights-based approach to how we think of healthcare. And so the funding itself sometimes can worsen outcomes for people because the people who do funding want to decontextualize their funding. It's as if their funding is happening in these perfect boardrooms where everything is just well considered and the variables are managed. That funding is happening in real life. And so if you are not going, again, feminism, women do unpaid labor all the time, constantly, everywhere, not just within the household. And so when we are thinking about feminist grant making and funding, why then do we not pay the Black women in Africa in these programs the same as they pay other women everywhere else in Europe and in America? Why are our salaries less? Why are our benefits less? Right? So it is part of the global, but the human politics of patriarchy, of power, of misuse of power. And again, we'll just give you just enough so that when you start complaining, you look like you are ungrateful. But actually, what we are giving you doesn't even meet your needs, but we keep people in this perpetual cycle of, gratitude and, oh my gosh, without you would be nothing. Actually, maybe sometimes without you would be a lot further, and so that's just my experience, right? And all of these different spaces and levels, and I do think there is something to be said about feminist funding and principles, and not forgetting the other important element. Why are we here? Why do we need money from Europe or the US for us to do critical, essential service provision? So the lack of accountability through our own governance structures is also part of what we should be doing. But those partners don't want to, oh, it's too political. No. Just take the money and go and convene a few women, young girls, and get them through. No, these are political issues, because then we will ask them for reparations. Then we will ask them to bring the gold and the diamonds that they've stored in their vaults, because they keep extracting from us resources that we could be using, that we could determine for ourselves what the future looks like. But we don't even have those resources because they're still being extracted, right? To further their own agendas in their own countries, and then come back to us and say, oh, we're so nice. Look at all of these programs that we are implementing in Johannesburg or in Zambia or wherever. And I think for me, it's a trick. It's a trick to keep us there in perpetual gratitude. And I think we need to be a lot more ungrateful and demand these things as part of our human rights, as part of reparations, as part of racial justice. And I think we ought to take it on, even if it sounds too radical, but it has to be done, and all of us can do it at different paces and spaces. There are spaces where I can say this. There are spaces where I know there's a particular way that I need to say and get the point across. So all of us have capacity to do this work for each other at different levels, at different spaces. But I think we ought to decide that surely it's not okay to have global north countries continue to extract resources from the African continent, come back and set an agenda for us because of the cause of the things they oppose. And then we must be grateful that they're giving us some crumbs to then try and survive life, and not even our own terms. So for me, it's a bit philosophical and more political than a funding answer, but I do think it's important that we don't fall into the trap of neocolonialism as well. So, close to and you remember that inflation that we had built into salaries, because they had decided as a funder that they are not paying inflation corrected salaries. And we said, you either take your funds or you give us this 6%, because for us, we're not going to exploit our staff by keeping them at a salary level that is not related to the economy of the country, And for us, that was us exercising our feminism to say, we're not going to beg for this money. We need it. But if it comes with the exploitation of our people, we don't want it. And I think I've grown in the recent years to say, keep your money. I've had to say to a couple of funders, no, keep your money. It comes with a lot of problems. Because, which speaks to the point we're making, are we willing to push it? And I know we should give I think
No, I think it's overly ambitious. Money. You include money for critical. I demand this, I demand this. I would say, excuse me, have you thought about demanding it from the people whose responsibility it is to actually be providing it? And the people whose mandate, who you
white column next to it is the previous year's comparison. And also the figures are in thousands of rands, so that's R000 at the top. Therefore, you have to add 1,000 behind each of those figures to see the full figures. So, for example, total income, as you can see, is 50,669, but that's 50 million in other words, 56,900. Okay, so the same applies for our presentation. I think, as was also mentioned earlier by Concho, that after we had the change in direction from health and development to the social justice agenda, we haven't been able to continue with some of the grants we previously had, like Global Fund, etc. And therefore our revenue has come down a lot. The number of employees has come down. But I think the important thing is what we must always look at, and I think it also came out in the discussion on the panel, is to have impact, and not to just to be able to say we have 150 million rand of revenue, we're a big NGO, big player in the field, but meanwhile, what is the real impact on the ground? So I think even if Soul City is now a fairly small organization with a revenue of 50 million per annum, it's actually the things which Phila also shared earlier on as to what do we actually do with those funds and are we achieving impact. So you also notice that our investment income is about a quarter of our total income, and that has become a very important part of our revenue. I think Cyprian in his remarks also referred to the fact that NGOs need to look at becoming more sustainable, and with that in view, Soul City did create an investment company in 2006, which participated in broad-based economic empowerment transactions over the years and has built up a solid portfolio of investments. And to the extent that is now providing Soul City annually with about 12 billion rand of income, which helps us a lot with the structure of the company, paying for what we're doing, because as also earlier mentioned by sometimes donors are not keen on paying so much cost for admin, that without the core support, the organization cannot exist and it cannot do these programs which are changing lives. So, during the time when there was economic turndown throughout the world, a lot of non-profits went out of business, but because Soul City and its sort of leaders at the time had the foresight to actually create this investment company, it's helping us to not only ride those waves, but also going forward to be able to continue doing the good work, because it reduces the reliance on donors. If you look at the expenditure, we have about 65% of our expenditure to programs. That includes the program salary staff, and then the operational expenses, that would be the finance, HR, and those core functions, salaries, as well as all our overheads, from rent to audit fees and everything in between. Throughout the income statement, we will see that compared to the previous year, it's very closely aligned. Everywhere it's just gone up slightly in this current year compared to the previous year. And we are very happy that we managed to still come with the surplus down to a surplus in the year of 154,000. Then just looking at revenue in a bit more detail, you'll notice, of course, that our largest grants are coming from the Department of Health, and then in this last year we've also secured the GBF Respond Fund grant, and the other ones are a lot smaller, and we are continuously, and Ina and the senior management team will continue in the efforts to bring those donors on board that are like-minded and that are willing to also talk to us and to hear what we believe is necessary rather than just pushing down their agenda on us. We've also this year received again some license fees from previous Soul City productions, Soul Buddies production that was rebroadcast. So even our previous productions still have value for us because a lot of us in there are still as true today as it was then, as relevant, and it can also help us to as an income source. Looking at the expenditure, you'll see we still in 2019, of just this the last 5 years, you can see how much the blue column, which is our project expenditure, how much that has come down from a time when we had the global funds, and it was even higher before that. So now we sort of stabilizing, and hopefully we'll be going forward. So as I say, the blue column is our project expenditure, the core salaries for finance and admin is the red, and green is our overheads. So as you will notice, we've managed to keep our expenditure on our core costs very flat, although of course 19 the program spend came down, but in spite of inflation, we also had to sort of look at our project expenditure because that's limited by what funding we could secure from donors. Why? But that is more easily to expand and contract depending on what funding we have from donors. But your salaries are not so easy to sort of manipulate that because you can't just hire and fire like they do in America. So here we believe in investing in our people, and we trust our people will be loyal to Soul City and give Soul City the service that they are giving. So the green one, which is our overheads, as you can see, that's even come down a little bit the last year or two, and we anticipate for the new financial year it will come down further because we've just moved to new premises, which is sort of up to our operational cost by about 1.5 million. So despite the inflation, we are trying to manage those costs and keep it within the reasonable limits. Of course, for donors, they don't want to see a huge amount of funding going to operational costs. So therefore, we try to keep that down. Of total grants are actually going towards the administration component of it. The rest all gone out for the actual activities that it's given for. Then looking at the statement of financial position, or the balance sheet as we used to call it in the old days, it's quite a simple balance sheet. We don't have any long-term liabilities or debt. We have current liabilities yet on the bottom half. The 2.668 on the payables, those are normal creditors. And then the other line item there is deferred income. And maybe I can just explain for a moment what that is. So when we receive money from our donors, we don't take it to the income statement as income. Instead, we bring it to the balance sheet and reflect it there as a liability until such time as the funds are used. So as we use the funds, so we are moving the grant income from the balance sheet, from liabilities to the income statement as revenue. So that ensures that our project expenditure and the project revenue are always in agreement with each other. And at any time we are able to see exactly what funds we're still holding on behalf of donors, which so that represents funds already received in advance by donors, but we are still busy using it as at that point in time. The current level is at 14 million, and that level does sort of go up and down as because most of our donors pay us 1 or 2 tranches a year. And so I think the important thing just to note there is that it's not a liability that we plan to pay back. It's that money will be transferred to the income statement as we incur the cost. So our real liability, current liability is only the 2.6 million, whereas our current assets, as you can see, is 35 million in cash and 1.79 million in other current assets. On the cash side, also just to mention, our cash looks very high. It's partly so because the deferred income at the once a year, which is our donor money, of course, that's all kept in cash as well. And so that's part of the cash that we hold in. So of that 35 million in cash, 14 million of that belongs to our donors, and we even keep it in separate bank accounts to ensure there's no commingling or using the donors' money by mistake. That leaves about 20 million of cash, which is a buffer for us in terms of if donors are late in their payments to us, so we have working capital to still continue the organization, pay our salaries, pay our operational costs for due. And also, if there's anything that would, in a specific year, we can't secure enough grants, we have this as a buffer to help us fund some project costs as well. Then, just on the reserves, so we have 23 million, as explained, this is what we use it for as a buffer and also as a contingency fund, I would say. And just to give indication, our board has given us a mandate that we should keep as reserves enough money to cover about 6 to 9 months of operational costs, so that we always have some money in hand and we are not sort of dire straits should a donor stop funding us or should the donor be late in their payments. So we are currently sitting on 8.2 months. That's just a calculation. It's very unrestricted reserves to our total operating costs. So operating costs for the year, including program salaries, is 33.9 million, and therefore we have 8 months of cost within our reserves. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. And I don't know, maybe also lunchtime, but here, if you have questions, feel free to approach me.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for that. You know, when Eugene left, the one thing I said to him is that he's taught me to make sense of the numbers. It doesn't sound too much like French when I hear him talk about the numbers. I think it's like a big I know some of these words are not in use, and it's such a pleasure to have worked with him. So just before we wrap up for lunch, and for Elaine to tell us all the logistics for lunch, the venue, I'd just like to call upon the new CFO to just give closing remarks before we break for lunch.
Good day. I think it's still before lunch. Good day, colleagues. How are you? You sound a bit hungry. Thank you very much for having me, and I would like to extend this opportunity to thank maybe start with the board for extending the offer to me, led by the chairperson. A wonderful warm welcome from the CEO and the rest of the staff. I really since I've been in the organization for the past 5 years. And I'd like to thank my colleagues, in particular Eugene, for holding the fort for me in the last 15 years. I must indicate that there's no mandate that you must take it for granted. So I had spent the last 5 years in the South African National Parks. And it's very interesting when I was having a conversation to join the organization, I said to myself, why would I want to work in the park? Let alone, but not to know that when I went into the organization, it was massive and bigger than I thought. And environment is one of the critical issues, as much as the feminist agenda. And I think every agenda inside deserves to be supported by single people. And we need to give it all our effort. I just want to indicate that I'm very excited to be part of the organization and really looking forward to take from Eugene and make sure that I create a sustainable organization. As you have seen from the numbers that we have, is that we have a very, not a big balance sheet, but a very strong balance sheet for the level of the organization that we are. And if you look at the financial statement, especially in the income statement, we're doing very well in terms of revenue, even though it remained flat for over 2 years. What I really like about the organization is that we seem to be spending every money that we've been allocated to spend. I mean, if you look at the income statement that Eugene have shared with us, the numbers look very good. Some people might be alarmed to say, but why is our surplus actually dropped from 658,000 to about 154? But that's a beauty of it because it shows that we have the capacity to spend our money. If you look at our resources as well, our balance sheets, you can see that the biggest asset that we have is really cash resources, which is extremely good. And our liabilities are not real liabilities in the true sense of liability, because we don't owe people money except the fact that we've got donor money, which we is currently in our account. So what I would like to say is that it provides a very interesting case study for me in building what I call financial sustainability for the organization. And I think Eugene and I will be talking about what is available. I mean, if you look at the breakdown of that 35 million that we have, it's made up of two numbers. One is the 14 million that he's talking about, which is the donor funding, and the remainder of that is the organizational fund, which is about 70 million. That is equivalent to about 8 months of our monthly expenses. And I said, as I was thinking about it, is that perhaps we need to ramp that up to 12 months going forward. And perhaps we can get to 24 months. Yeah. So our really, I mean, what I'm very excited about is that it's not the admin fee that we charge the donors, but it's a salary recovery, because that's able to recover our money instead of losing our resources, which is very, very exciting. So I'm very excited to be at Salt City. I mean, Rebecca and I have already started working on the initial strategy, but our really key effect, which we'll be working with the CEO in the next few months, is a financial sustainability. How do we make sure that this organization is sustainable, at least for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years, and the next 15 years, like it has been done in the last 20 years. And I think the mandate that you have is bigger than many people may think it is. It might look like we're only focusing on feminine, but it's a very important aspect. I want to close with this. There's a picture that I saw, and I think I will find it simple, which shows in a race, in a relay race, where there are women and there are men which were in the same race. And I'm not sure how many people have seen it. You will see that most of the women, in order to overcome, they have to actually pass through washing. There was washing machines, there was cooking, there was children. But if you look at the lane of the men, they have no heading. So the question is that how can we be considered to be the same when we have different structures that we have to move in order to compete fairly? And I think we have a huge responsibility that we make sure that at least we clear those backlogs in front of the women so that they can compete fairly with their counterparts, which are men. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we actually have a public service announcement which I'll share with you that shows exactly that, the difference between a man's day-to-day running and a woman's and what stands in between the way. But let's end on a good note, and the politics will remain for another time. Thank you so much to everyone who's attended today. We appreciate it. Thank you to our people, everyone who's joined us online as well. We are grateful to have had everyone in the room and to share the progress that Soul City is making despite the hurdles, in spite of the hurdles, and with the hurdles, and with the successes as well. And with that, Elaine will be standing outside. She's too shy to speak. I had asked her to come down, but she says she will silently direct outside to show us to the venue where we're going to have our lunch and where we can just talk about what we've discussed today and take the conversation further. Thank you again.